Hello, and welcome to today's lecture on Chapter 13 on presenting speeches. This chapter will cover topics such as speech anxiety, types of speech delivery, and using visual aids in your presentations. Now, one thing I know for certain, most people don't like giving speeches. In fact, they'd rather get a root canal than give a speech. So there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of nervousness and a lot of anxiousness involved when someone says to you, hey, you're going to give a speech in class next week. So today I'm going to be sharing you some tips that you can use to use your anxiety and channel it into positive energy to help you give the best possible speech. The reason why people are anxious about giving speeches is it's not normal. Right? You're in front of people that you don't know so well. You're worried about how they're going to judge you and what they're going to think about you. And anxiety is a very real thing. We all have it. Even I, as your professor, carry a little bit of anxiety around with me when I have to deliver a speech, believe it or not. I'm just a little bit better at managing my speech anxiety than you are. But lucky for you, I'm here to give you some tips on what you can do to get your speech anxiety under control. Now, there are two types of speech anxiety I want to talk about. The first is a facilitative speech anxiety, and the second is a debilitative speech anxiety. And as the word suggests, facilitative is the type of speech anxiety you want to focus on because it's a positive type of anxiety, whereas a debilitative speech anxiety is detrimental, and it stems from negative past experiences or irrational fears that you may have about public speaking. So speaking of irrational fears, let's talk about 4 types of irrational fears that people have about public speaking. The first one is a fallacy of catastrophic failure. And what they believe is that if something bad can happen, it will happen. And that's not true at all. You need to think positive. The glass is half full. Yes, you're a little nervous, but that's okay. So is everybody else, right? You can do this. So catastrophic failure really isn't going to happen to you in your speech. The second type of irrational fear is fallacy of perfection. Now, that's when you put an extreme amount of pressure on yourself to be absolutely flawless. Listen, nobody's absolutely flawless, even me. I'm just better at hiding it than you are, okay? So don't expect perfection because nobody's perfect, even your speech professor. Now, the next fallacy is the fallacy of approval. The need that everyone has to approve of you and like you and think you're awesome. That's not going to happen either. I mean, come on, you can't please all the people all the time. You're not going to make everybody happy. So all you can do is just the best possible job that you can. And the last type of irrational fear that people have about public speaking is the fallacy of overgeneralization. So what does that mean? That means that people tend to exaggerate and blow things up bigger than they are. So remember, it's not as hard as you think. And I'm going to share with you some tips to help overcome debilitative speech anxiety. So we want to lower the debilitative speech anxiety, and we want to boost your facilitative speech anxiety. So one way that you can overcome debilitative speech anxiety is to use your nervousness to your advantage. How do you do this, you ask? Good question. So think about performers, athletes, musicians, actors, actresses, all of the above. If you've ever been on a stage or you've been at playing your sport on a field, you know that right before a game or right before a show, you've got a little bit of nervous energy. So what you want to do is channel that into positive energy. So all you have to do is just flip that to your advantage. The second way to overcome debilitative speech anxiety is to be rational. Be logical. Half the stuff you're worried about isn't even going to happen, okay? Control the things that are within your control and leave the rest up to God because you can only control what's in your power. Be receiver-oriented. That's the third way to control your debilitative speech anxiety. When you're receiver-oriented, you're focused on your audience and you're not focused on yourself. You're making sure that your audience understands your message, and therefore you're not thinking about yourself. You're thinking about your audience. Try it. Believe me, it works. The fourth way you can do this is to be positive. Remember, it's all in your mindset. If you believe it, you can achieve it. You need to channel that positive self-talk and remind yourself that you are awesome and you can do this. Trust me. The last step is to be prepared. And I know many of you are procrastinators and that's worked well for you, but I can promise you in the field of public speaking and giving presentations, procrastinating has absolutely no place. So being prepared, practicing, dotting your I's and crossing your T's, making sure every element of your speech is practiced and rehearsed is going to be definitely something that's in your favor. I'm never going to say to you that you practiced too much. So be prepared, be positive, and control the things that are within your control. Now, I want to talk to you about the different types of speech delivery. We're doing many of these in this class. In fact, we're doing 3 of 4 of these. So the first one is a memorized speech, and this is the one we are not doing. So everybody take a deep sigh of relief. Whew, I don't have to memorize my speeches. So as you know, a memorized speech, if any of you have taken theater or have performed on stage, you have to memorize your lines. I don't require that of you. So we can throw this type of speech out the window for right now because you are not going to need to worry about it for this class. The second type of speech is a manuscript speech. So a manuscript speech is written out word for word and delivered word for word. So I am going to have you do a manuscript speech in the respect that you are going to write out the speech first as a paper, but then you're going to condense that into note cards and not read it. Because as you know, I don't want you to read your speeches word for word. I want you to deliver them from the heart. But a manuscript speech is usually when a speaker has a teleprompter behind the camera. Your news anchors use this. The President of the United States uses this during a speech or an address or a State of the Union address. So manuscript speaking can be very dull and very canned because it's read word for word. And unless you do have a teleprompter, then you're looking down at the notes, which then decreases your eye contact with your audience. Now, the third type of speech is an impromptu speech, and everybody hates this type of speaking because it's speaking on the spot with no prior preparation or knowledge, and it does increase people's anxiety. However, I feel it's an important skill to have, knowing how to give an impromptu speech, and that's why I have you do it in this class, because one day your boss is going to ask you to say a few words, or he's going to put you on the spot, and I want you to sound like the bright, intelligent, educated young person that you are. So that's why we're doing an impromptu speech. And then the final type of speech, and my personal favorite, is the extemporaneous speech. And what that means is that this speech is carefully planned and rehearsed in advance, and it's given with the aid of note cards. So remember, I never have you memorize anything. You can use note cards. But the extemporaneous speech delivery form is very casual. In fact, it looks like you're just having a conversation with a friend, but in fact, it's very well rehearsed, but it just seems spontaneous in its delivery. And actually, it is shown that extemporaneous speaking is, with practice, the most effective form of speech delivery. So again, the 4 different types of speech delivery are memorized speaking, manuscript speaking, impromptu speaking, and extemporaneous speaking. Now next, we're going to move on to using visual aids in your speeches. And as you know, you have to use visual aids in this class. But I'm very particular about the types of visual aids that you can use. So the first thing I'm going to do is discuss the various types of visual aids, and then I'm going to talk about how they are presented. So the first type of visual aid that you can use is an object or a model. So an object is obviously something that you would bring in and hold up in class. So if you were doing a speech on recycling, you could hold up a plastic water bottle or an aluminum can. But if, say, your object is too big to bring in, then you might use a model, which is a scaled representation of the object. This is used when the object is too large. You could have a diagram, which is a line drawing showing properties of that item. You could use a word or a number chart, and the value of this is it's visual depictions of the key facts or statistics about what you're speaking of. You could use a pie chart, which shows numbers of a whole broken down into slices of a pie. You could use a bar or a column chart, which compares two or more items over a distance. So if you're using a bar chart, this is done horizontally, going across, and if you're using a column chart, it is done vertically, going up. You could also use a line chart, which maps out the direction of a moving point. And you could also use a flow chart, which are boxes and arrows, which are put together as steps in a process. Now, regardless of what you use here, I do suggest that your visual aids are CVS. And when I mean CVS, I don't mean the drugstore. So let me explain. You want to make sure they're clear, they're visible, and they're simple. CVS, clear, visible, and simple. You want to make sure that your audience can see them. You want them to be clear and not too cluttered and not too much information. And you want them to be simple. Now, if you are using a photograph counts as a visual aid. Regardless of the type of visual aid you choose to use, you need to make it big enough for your audience to effectively see it. So, for example, I would suggest if it's not an object, if it's a photograph, it's a pie chart, a line chart, a graph, blow them up and put them on a PowerPoint and put them on the screen so they can be supersized so your audience can effectively see it. Then you can use a clicker or a pointer to effectively point in the different areas that you're going to be discussing. Again, it's a lot more simple for your audience to see it this way than to hold something up like this and expect your audience to be able to see that from a distance. Remember, the back row of your audience needs to see it just as clearly as the front row of your audience. So different media or different methods for presenting your visual aids could actually be using the chalkboard or the whiteboard, writing something on the board behind you, although you don't want to turn your back to the audience as you're delivering your speech. So make sure whatever you have written is already up on the board. You might use a flip chart or a poster board, but that might be a little awkward. If you do have a poster board and you do create a poster, and I've shown you many examples of the fabulous posters that were created by my students, make sure they're CVS. Make sure they're not too busy. Make sure the font is big enough. I would strongly advise against writing directly on the poster board. I would type something out in Microsoft Word in extremely large, bolded font, print it out, and then attach it to the poster board. Make it look professional, okay? And I would use a foam back poster board over a flimsy poster board that may have trouble standing up on its own. You could also use a handout as a visual aid, but I caution you to not hand anything out to your audience as you're speaking. And the reason why is that as soon as you do that, your audience's attention will be drawn to whatever it is that you've handed out and off of you, the speaker, which isn't a good thing. You could also use a projector. So you could pull something up, a PowerPoint, you could show a YouTube video and utilize the electronics and the technology that we have here at Georgia Highlands College. But remember, sometimes technology can fail you. And like Murphy's Law, if something is bound to happen, it's going to happen on speech day, okay? I cannot tell you how many times someone couldn't open up their PowerPoint, they couldn't pull up their media, whatever they sent to themselves, their thumb drive wouldn't work. It was a disaster. Guess what? They still had to present without it. So remember, be a good Boy Scout or a Girl Scout, figure out a plan B, because if your visual aid doesn't work, you're going to have to present anyway. So here are some rules for presenting your visual aids effectively. One thing that you need to do, obviously, is keeping it simple. We talked about CVS, so clear, visible, and simple. You want to consider their size. Again, something that's very small. If you're going to show a photograph of your dog, it's going to be a lot more effective if you blow up that photograph, supersize it, and pull it up on the projector behind you. Also, you want to make your visuals attractive. You want to make them good looking, right? And you don't want to use colors that are difficult to see. So as much as I love yellow, it's not really a good color for visual aids. You also want to be appropriate. You don't want to show a visual aid that's not appropriate and really doesn't have relevance to your speech. You want to be in control of your visual aids at all time. You want to have them ready to go. And you also want to talk about your visual aid and point it out as you're talking. Okay, many times when my students present their speech, they finish and everyone applauds, and then they go, "Oh, but wait!" And then they realize they forgot their visual aid. And at that point, it's too late. So my friends, when I tell you to practice and I tell you to prepare and I tell you to rehearse, when you put together your note cards, write on the specific note card, show visual aid now. And then that will be a reminder to you, because sometimes you do get nervous and it's normal and you forget the visual aid. But you could have the visual aid behind you the whole time, but if you don't refer to it or speak of it during your speech presentation, then you don't get credit for it. So it's really important that you practice and you rehearse with your visual aid. You hold it, you touch it, but you keep your eye contact and your focus on your audience while you're speaking. Now, when you're practicing your speech, and we all know that practicing is the key to success, it's really important that you present it to yourself. Now, the mirror doesn't lie, my friend. So my strong advice to you is to practice in front of a mirror. See what your posture looks like. See what your gestures look like. You can't hide from the mirror. So again, present it to yourself. Another way of doing it is to record yourself. Set up your iPhone, maybe not in front of the mirror. Set it up in your living room or your bedroom, wherever you're comfortable. Record yourself. Play it back. You would be amazed at what you all are doing. You're sticking your hands in your pockets. You're playing with your hair. You're touching your clothing. You're fixing your glasses. All of the things that you're doing, and you don't even realize that you're doing them. So recording it and playing it back is really going to be helpful. Also, present it to a small group of friends or your family and ask for honest feedback. Okay, ask what you're doing wrong. Ask what you could improve upon. And the more you practice and rehearse, the more confident you'll get, and you can actually tweak it and improve the speech by finding the perfect word or the perfect delivery for that particular sentence or portion of your speech. If at all possible, try and present your speech and practice it in the room in which it will be given. So if you're giving it on campus in our classroom and it's possible to practice in there, I would highly recommend you do so. If it's not available as an option, then practice wherever you can. But it does help to practice in the room that you will be delivering your presentation in. So, there are some visual and auditory aspects of your delivery, and I want to talk about them because they're all very important. So the first visual aspect of your delivery is how you look. And let's face it, we judge people on how they look. We judge them on their clothing, their hairstyle, how they're put together, all of it. And it doesn't matter if you're male or female. It's extremely important the way you look. If you look good, you're going to feel good. And if you feel good, you're going to present with confidence. So remember, wear your best outfit. Wear what's flattering and appropriate and comfortable. Another thing about visual aspect of delivery is your movement. I don't want you standing straight like a soldier and not moving, because it's really awkward to stand here so stiff. So moving around helps release some of that energy, and it's actually good. It gets your blood pumping. Have some movement. Your posture is important, people. Stand tall, shoulders back, smile. This exudes confidence and it helps build rapport with your audience. Facial expression, extremely important. Smile, guys. It's good for you. If you smile at your audience, they're going to smile back at you, hopefully. And if they're not, shame on them. You should be smiling at the speaker and encouraging them and watching them and showing them with your body language that you care about what they're speaking of. And then finally, one of the most important visual aspects of delivery is eye contact. A lot of my students struggle with this because they find it awkward to look out into the audience and see all these faces. Again, my goal is to build to build a community where you feel safe and you feel as though you're in a room with friends. I know we come in as strangers, but we leave as friends. So when you are giving a presentation, it's important that you look at everybody in your audience, okay? Don't just pick one spot and stare at that spot, because then you look like a robot. Now, I know it's kind of awkward to give direct eye contact to people. So what you may do is scan around the room and focus your eye contact along the tops of the audience members' heads. And that way it appears as though you're looking at people in the audience, but really you're not looking directly into their eyes. And that might decrease some of your anxiety, because I know it's a little bit anxiety provoking to look people in the eye as you're presenting. So those are the visual aspects of delivery. I want to talk about the auditory aspects of delivery, so the vocal aspects, because those are extremely important. So we look at volume, and of course we don't have a mic in our classroom, so it's important that you speak loudly enough for your audience to hear. Now, I don't have a problem with that. I always project my voice, but some people tend to be low talkers, so they're more soft-spoken and they talk more quietly. And that's not good in a presentation situation, because if you don't have a mic, then the people in the back of the room won't be able to hear you. So speak loudly and speak proudly. The second auditory aspect is rate, and rate is how quickly you speak. Now, students, when they're nervous, tend to speak extremely fast because they're nervous, and they figure the quicker they get through it, the better it'll be. But to be honest, it really doesn't sound good when you're racing through your speech as though you're running a marathon. So you want to practice so that you have the right flow, the right pace. You're not speaking too quickly and you're not speaking too slowly. There's a perfect spot right in the middle. And so by practicing, you'll become more comfortable at your rate and at your speed. The third auditory aspect is pitch. So pitch is how high or how low your voice is. So you need to practice with the pitch and the tone of your voice. And then lastly, this is super important, is articulating your words properly. And that's pronunciation, making sure that you're pronouncing your words clearly. Sometimes the sound of the letter P and the letter D are mistaken. So if I say tap or tab, it's hard to tell what someone's saying unless they articulate. So tap or tab. It's practice, people. You will be fine. You just need to practice articulating clearly. And with that being said, I'm going to give you 4 ways to help improve your articulation of your words. The first is to say the entire word. Don't leave out any syllables. The entire word. You also want to pronounce each sound correctly. You also don't want to add extra sounds or extra. So for example, the word athlete. Sometimes I've heard people pronounce the word athlete They added a little bit of extra in there. It's athlete, not athlete. So these are the small little details that are going to make your speech. That's going to elevate your speech. And also, you want to speak clearly. And by slowing down a little bit, it will help you speak clearly. Now, when you slow down your rate, you may not be able to get in everything you want to say, in which case you might have to trim back and tailor your speech a little bit. You may have to cut something out, but you want to make sure you stay within your time range. The range of time that I give you for your speech is super important. So that's why practicing and timing yourself with a stopwatch is extremely important. And the final thing I want to talk about is giving you some tips for online or virtual speeches, because it's very possible that you're going to have to give a recorded speech or a virtual speech for my class. You may have to give it via Zoom, or you may have to record yourself and upload it to the Office 365 video channel. So let me give you some tips to help you with those virtual speeches. You want to try out different platforms. You want to check out Zoom. Obviously, we're using Zoom for this course, but you might use Skype. You might have a different platform that you might be using. You want to schedule a run through before the event. Again, practice, practice, practice. If I have you upload a speech that's going to be graded, that you're going to record, I don't want you to record it once and go, okay, I'm done. Let me upload that. Play it back. Watch it. The beauty of submitting a recorded speech is that you get to analyze it and you get to redo it. You get a redo as many times as you want before you send me the speech you want me to grade. So keep that in mind. That's a definite advantage over giving a live speech in a classroom. You also want to use dynamic visuals. Remember the CVS principle: clear, visible, and simple. You also want to, if you are doing a PowerPoint, you want to make sure you keep your slides simple. Not too many slides, too many words, and you should follow the 7x7 principle when you're doing a PowerPoint slide. That means no more than 7 lines of text going down on your slide and no more than 7 words per line. Anything more than that on one slide is going to be too overwhelming for your audience to process. And you want to keep it entertaining, but remember, we don't need sounds. We don't need things flying in off the screen, from the side. We don't need noises and boings and fancy stuff, okay? If you have to resort to that, you're taking away the focus off of you, and you are the most important part of your speech, not your visual aids. It's you. And finally, what I want to end with giving you a tip for giving a good online or virtual speech, or even a speech that you do live. That's to start and end on time. I give you a time frame. I expect you to follow it. When you go to claim your Academy Award one day or your Grammy, you do that acceptance award speech, you're going to have a very limited amount of time before they play the music and yank you off the stage. So please be respectful of the time frame that's given. Now, today I've talked about how you can positively present your speech, the things that you need to consider, such as your speech anxiety, the different types of delivery, and how to use visual aids effectively. I hope you take the information that I shared with you today and you put it into practice, because I know your next speech is going to be positively perfect. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.